Good evening. Welcome to the Masters and Doctoral Support Program. Apologies for the delay in our start. I had some unexpected connectivity issues. I hope that we will make up the time. I apologize once again for the late start. But that aside, I want to welcome you to the first of our sessions. And today we're basically going to look at issues to do with how you develop your topic, how you problematize your chosen study area, and also how you develop the aim and objectives of your study. And then once that is done, I need to introduce you all to the university's primary focus on catalytic research niche areas. So basically the session will take that format. As always, I will take an opportunity to turn off the camera and share with you the presentation that I have for the evening. And before we start, my name is Professor Tennyson Mukuchini. I am the project leader for this project, and I also happen to be the acting executive dean for the College of Graduate Studies. Welcome to you all. Now, as I proceed on to the actual presentation for the day, I will turn off my camera. Please do remember that we've got a question and answer tab that you have access to, and you can use that to post questions as and when you feel you need to post them throughout the session. I will, of course, attend to all these things at the very end of the presentation, just to allow us to have a very explicit differentiation between the presentation and the questions. I will turn off my camera now and share with you the screen and the presentation that I have for you to look at this evening. Thank you. Right. I will begin now by just setting out some definitional issues that relate to the areas that we're going to be looking at. Of course, as I've said, this is targeted to both to all our postgraduate students. So we have honors students who join this session in preparation for their master's levels journey. We've got master's students, and we also have doctoral students who all have one primary focus, and that focus is to get the topic, the aim, the purpose, objectives, and the research questions as tight and as appropriately specified as possible. Once again, this session, of course, some would have said we could split it to the different levels of study, but as I proceed through what I aim to share with you, you will recognize that it's actually very possible to do this as a singular session for all the groups. Now, firstly, as always, with everything to do with research, we need to just identify very clearly where we intend to go with the session and where the limitations of what we're going to look at are. First and foremost, my focus will be on just speaking through some definitional issues. Every time we engage in anything to do with research, it is always good to clarify what the operational definitions that surround that topic are, because normally those definitions have very key identifiers and instructions that tell you about how you should deal with or operate in relation to a particular aspect of your study. And then the next part we'll look at is that those of you who have listened to me previously or have engaged in any of the sessions that I do, you will know that I say research is about problems, 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 problems. And it is about expanding your knowledge in relation to a particular problem that you have identified. So it is important that the problem that you make as the center of your research is well articulated it is convincing, it's sellable, and people can actually recognize that it is a problem worthy of your attention. After that, we'll talk through some of the different operators, magnifiers, we sometimes call them. And these are the magnifiers that people utilize to make their problem bear itself out to the fullest. And those magnifiers that we'll look at specifically today are topicality, relevance, statistical significance, and how each of these can be utilized to bring out the key aspects of the problem that you wish to research.
Sorry, Prof.
Yes.
The presentation is not yet showing on the screen.
All right. Okay. Let me just make sure that okay. Now, how is that? I thought I'd done it. I've taken it off and I'm putting it back on again.
Yes, right. That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. What, as I've said, with the research focus that we have, the session will look at operationalizing the definitions that guide how we work through this. I will also help you to better problematize the area that you're focused on or have chosen as your focus, and actually test whether it's a worthy problem for you to focus on, and how you specify that problem. For any listener or anyone who doubts the validity of what you've chosen is by using these things that we call problem magnifiers. I will talk you through how the problem magnifiers are utilized in research and how you can use them in your study to give your study the right level of problematic presence. So what we then also will do is taking up from the issue of magnifying a problem, we will then look at how you develop the aim of your study, how you develop the research objectives that guide your study, and then of course the journey that one travels from having research objectives and turning those into research questions, and how one form of specification is necessary, in what circumstance one utilizes it, and so forth. So those are the focus areas of the first part of the presentation. The second part will be me doing a very quick introduction to UNISA's key research priorities, and we refer to them as the research niche, catalytic niche areas, and I will speak to you about those and how those matter to you as a researcher within the UNISA space. As I've said, everything that we study in research, or everything that we look at in relation to the research process, is often guided by definitions, and those definitions have been standardized over the course of time. They really do capture the essence of what we are asking you to focus on. And for that reason, I will I generally start off by looking at some of the definitions so we can ingrain some behaviors in you so that going forward, everything you do subscribes to these key behaviors. And in relation to that, two specific definitions stand out as being central points of departure for anyone doing research. And one is that you must understand what research is about. Sackett, Strauss, Richardson, Rosenberg, and Haynes have a very thoroughly tested definition, which sees research as being systematic, rigorous, and logical investigation that aims to answer questions about a phenomena of interest or a problem. This I will break down so we can orientate you very clearly, and I hope that as you listen to this, you take some key notes, because these are the trademark expectations of everything that you will do in relation to research. From the very, very start of you thinking you've got a problem you want to look at, to you disseminating and sharing the outcomes of your study. Firstly, we expect that your approach and the way that you utilize knowledge, you identify a topic will be systematic. And by systematic, we're saying that there are particular systems of thinking, there are particular systems of procedure, there are particular systems of operationalizing things that exist, and everything you do in research has to be able to trace itself back to a system. So when, for example, if you decide to choose a topic and you decide to focus on a problem, how you decide that something is a problem that's worthy of your attention or a problem that's too small to be focused on is all guided by systems. And so everything you do from identifying your problem to deciding that, okay, I've got problem X, I want to study it. And when you study it using a chosen set of systems to assist you to collect data, to analyze it, to report it, and so forth. So this sense about everything that you do being systematic has to be something that's always embedded in every single decision you make. There is no decision that you make where you do not expose or explain or show out the systematic nature of research. So remember that every single action, every single little move has to be driven and guided by a system. You don't always consciously think about the systems, but if someone were to stop you and say you decided to do this, what system of thinking, what procedural system, what system of operation guided you, you should be able to answer that every single time with every single little decision you make. So please remember that. Secondly, research is about rigor. It's about rigorous. And rigorous really means looking at something from every possible angle that is available to the human mind. So if, say, you were interested in what causes or how a particular action impacts somebody's well-being or whatever, rigor says you should look at every type of potential consequence that could exist. So you don't look at the things that align with what you want to see, or you don't look at the things that are obvious or things that support your pre-existing hypothesis. You are meant to look at every possible manifestation of whatever you are looking at, so that you can truly say you've got a 360-degree awareness of the subject. So anytime that we give you anything in research, the expectation is that you look around every possible explanatory framework for it. You look around every possible way that it could be perceived, processed, and responded to, and you show an awareness of the fact that you looked at the top, you looked at the bottom, you looked everywhere. If research is about seeking answers, rigor is to do with the extent to which you look in different spaces to find those answers. So when we talk about research being rigorous, a simplistic illustration of this is if you think, what would happen if you misplaced money in a room? The rigor of research requires that you look from the top of the room to the very bottom and don't leave any stone unturned. And so that is a principle of how you operate in the research space. Next, we talk about it being centered on logical investigation. The logic that we speak about in research has to do with you being able to demonstrate that the processes you followed, the conclusions that you reach, and what you do with those conclusions all appear to follow a logic that someone else other than you can pursue and understand. And all that you are asked for in the research world is that when you make decisions, you move from one specific space to another, you give the reader enough understanding of why it is that you moved from A to B and to C, so that the logic of your progression is always very clear to the reader. Of course, some logical processes that you take are quite obvious, and so you don't have to spend so much time explaining those. But the processes that are less obvious, where the logic is a bit more obscure, the expectation is that you would spend a little bit more time explaining to the reader how you reached the conclusions that you've reached. And similarly, research aims to answer questions about a phenomena of interest or a problem. So what we are saying is that everything that you do in research is about answering unanswered questions that relate to a particular problem or to a particular area of research interest. So unless you are proposing to understand a problem better in research, you are not researching anything. And the common mistake that people make is if you ask them, so what is the aim of your study? They'll say, oh, my study aims to develop a model. My study aims to develop recommendations. And the fact is your study is not about developing a model, and neither is it about developing guidelines. A research study is about answering the questions that relate to your topic. That answer may then provide you the basis and the elements you need to develop a model for you to develop recommendations. But the actual journey of research was not about developing recommendations or a model. The journey was about understanding and answering the questions that relate to that problem or phenomena of interest. So once you've answered a question, the answer gives you the tools to then design an intervention. So when people talk about what their study is all about or what the focus of their research is, you should never find yourself saying the focus of your research is to develop a model. The focus of your research is not that. It's to answer a specific question in order that you may develop a model or some explanatory framework. So that is this definition, even though it's literally 2 or 3 lines, it's very loaded in terms of the expectations that we ask of you. The systematic way that we expect you to be, the rigor that you'll show, your subscription to logical investigation processes, your aim to answer questions about a phenomena of interest or a problem, and understanding that it is that journey towards the answering of the questions or understanding of the phenomena that is the journey we call research. But there are research outputs, and one of them is that once people have understood a problem better, they know the answers and are able to develop mechanisms for how we implement those answers. So that's what research is about. Now, the research process is literally the set of steps that someone follows to be able to undertake research. So it's the methodical step-by-step approach to finding and examining a variety of reliable scholarly resources on a particular problem area. So basically, research is the thing that you are doing, and the research process is the steps that you take to do this thing, that thing being your ability to provide a logical investigation that aims to answer questions about a phenomena of interest or a problem. So that's the foundation of everything that we will do in all respects. Everything that we do on this module, in anything that I teach you, has got very clear universal characteristics. Whether the study you will end up doing is qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, or whatever, the philosophical, the characteristics are the same. That research is systematic, rigorous. It's about a disciplined search for the truth as it relates to a specified problem. And of course, you should see it as a series of thoughtful decisions about all the different ways and their consequences as they relate to a problem. So when I say it's a series of thoughtful decisions, Firstly, we will sit down and discuss your topic. And in that process of your topic, I, Tennyson, might end up with a version A of the topic. The person sitting next to you will end up with version C. Someone else will end up with a different version. And none of you and all of you could be right as long as you've been systematic in how you got there. You've been rigorous. You've engaged in a series of thoughtful decisions about why this focus and not another focus. So you then realize that literally I could sit 200 students in one room, give them one topic, and be quite clear that none of them will handle it the same. So when it comes to research, once again, I spoke about the research process being the steps that people go through when they are understanding this area that they want to focus on. And one of these steps, or the very first step is this phase of conception. Conception is the point at which your research idea is developed, is refined, where you have this abstract sense of a problem that you know about or a phenomena that interests you, and you want to think about it, you want to rethink what it is that you think you've seen, you want to make some suggestive theories about what you think is going on, make some decisions about what aspect you will follow, and then of course review all these ideas. So when you are conceptualizing something, this is where you go from. You go from a point of having what people will call an anecdotal observation. So you could be someone who works, for example, in business management, and you've noticed that companies that are started off where by individuals rather than partnerships and groups of people tend to fail within the first year. That might be an observed problem you've got, and you don't understand why that is so. So then you start to think, okay, I've seen this happening around me. Let me go and search the literature so I can understand whether this personal observation that I'm making is indeed replicated and echoed by the literature. So you go and you review the literature to understand whether this hint of a problem that you've got is indeed something that others who have studied this notion, this phenomena, have also arrived at. Of course, at that point, you could read and suddenly discover that, oh no, the problem you wanted to focus on has been attended to by others and they provided answers. At that point, most people would park that research problem and look for the next one. So if you get a sense that you have something that you have anecdotally or personally perceived as a problem, but the minute you start reading, you realize that no, this issue is not a problem. The problem was that you had a limited understanding of what research had been done around it. At that point, you park your topic and move on to the next thing. But for many of us, a lot of the problems we identify as individuals tend to be things that when you go and read up in the literature, you find that they do exist. Actually, your problem does in effect exist. Then as you start to read around this, you start to develop ideas in your mind or theorizations about what's going on. So taking that same example that I had where we speak about someone who has seen more or less that all the businesses, startup businesses that are started by individuals tend to fail within the first year. They might review the literature and discover that actually there is a suggestion in the literature that this is indeed true. Then, of course, they start to, as you read up more and more, you get a sense of, you start to develop an idea of a theoretical construction of what the explanation for this phenomena is. Remember, you want to answer a question. And as you are looking at this, the question that you're really answering is what are the factors that contribute to one-person companies not doing as well as the ones that involve more than one person. When you develop your theoretical construction, this comes from you reading a lot about your topic and suddenly thinking, there are some theories that exist in relation to what could be going on. And in this example, one possible theory might be that maybe there's a theory that suggests that the journey of creating a company is a very stressful one, and it's one that needs quite a number of people to share out the emotional and intellectual burden. So that's theory number one. Maybe the second theory might be to suggest that singular thinkers, people who think on their own, tend to have very limited skill sets. So when they develop a company, they might have the great innovation, but not the financial management skills that are needed. But if there were 3 or 4 people in the conceptualizing company, there might be more chance that all the required skills are covered. So in essence, you've got 2 theories in your head, that it's to do with individuals not doing too well as individuals compared to groups. Secondly, it's to do with the fact that individuals generally have limited skill set or whatever. So that speaks to what I've identified as item 3 on this slide, where you develop a theoretical construction of what you think is going on. Then, of course, depending on the type of study that you're doing, some people will create a hypothesis. And a hypothesis, in simple terms, is a statement of what you expect to see. So if you're someone who thinks that, look, I expect to find that single person companies do badly because the individuals are generally selfish and not very good at business, and that is your hypothesis. You create that as a hypothesis, and your study then looks at testing whether this hunch that you've got is indeed true. So that's the conception phase. Once again, I've detailed for you in greater depth how things go. When you're formulating your research problem, you go from this individual observation of a phenomena or a research problem, and this is the anecdotal observation we're talking about. Then many of you observe things in your workspace because we tend to write or engage our research in the space that we work in or in the discipline that we hope to work in. So people will have this individual sense of a problem, then they will go to the practice space where they operate, and they will see that, this thing that I think is a problem appears to also exist for other groups within the same discipline or within the same practice environment. Then, of course, from there you think, okay, let me see if I can find research that confirms this problem. And that's you leaning on empirical evidence. Then, of course, after that, as you're reading about your topic, you realize that every researcher usually ends by saying, look, I've discovered this, but I wasn't able to figure this thing out. So every research tends to have answers, but it also ends by acknowledging some unanswered questions that exist. So as you read more, you get a sense of all the uncertainties that relate to the topic you've chosen, all the gaps of knowledge where people all say we've studied this, but we couldn't understand X. And so you develop a very good sense of what it is that is understood in your area, what it is that remains unanswered. And of course, you also will read in the research that you look at some possible explanations for what's going on. Then, of course, that now opens up the door for you to formulate the research problem. You now know that this is the thing you saw as an individual. You checked it out around your practice space. It's confirmed. You look at the empirical evidence out there. It's also pointing to the fact that this phenomena is still not understood. And you are noticing that the literature acknowledges things that it is uncertain about. It acknowledges gaps of knowledge. So you now have the makings of the perfect point of departure for a researchable problem. And then that, once you know what the problem is, then you're in a position to say, look, this is the problem. This is what I want to understand in relation to it. These are the methods that I will use to understand it, and so forth and so forth. So it's a very systematic approach. But now I have spoken to you about this word problem. And the first question that people say is, so how do I make the thing I am interested become a viable and respectable problem? And this is where this issue of problematizing or research focus comes in. And folks, this is a very rare, rarely exposed process or system of dealing with how you develop a problem. And I say to you, please pay attention to this. You of course have access to this presentation when it's done, and you can listen over and over. But do remember that this is literally the golden space in as far as this presentation goes, because it is an area that people gloss over, and they still expect you to do very well, but without giving you all the detailed tools. So once again, when you have an area that you need to study, you must assume certain things. Firstly, we are only interested in it if you can show it's a problem. You can show that it's a problem that's worthy of study. It's a problem that is complex enough for society to be bothered with. If you can't demonstrate that, then the very next question any reader looks at is, why are you even doing the study? So this idea of you validating the importance of your problem is at the very center of your study. If you can't show that the phenomena you're looking at presents a substantial enough problem, then why on earth are you doing the rest of what you do? So this part is critical. And when you are developing this body that can show that what you've chosen is really a problem of note, there are certain operators, there are certain ways of approaching it, certain things that we call problem magnifiers. So if you think about, firstly, here are some basic things to assume. If you assume that no one else on earth believes that what you think is a problem is a problem, so your first job is to sell the problem in its worst presentation, so people who read it can see the extent of what it is that bothered you enough for you to want to study it. So you are literally selling every dimension of the problem so that people can see it in every shape or form. Take, for example, if you were someone who wanted to show that your child or someone in your care really needed to be seen by a doctor, what you do is you approach that doctor by telling them every dimension of the problem that you can foresee, because you know that if you give them every dimension there is, it becomes harder for them to ignore the problematic nature of what you're presenting. So similar issue with the process of developing or problematizing your research focus. Firstly, how people do it is to demonstrate its global, continental, stroke national existence of the problem. And how you do that is simple. If, say, for example, I had chosen, and I will stick with my problem that I had chosen, the problem that many businesses that are started up by individuals fail, me showing that this is a problem worthy of your attention is if I can demonstrate that globally, all across the world, this phenomena of businesses failing is common, it exists, here are the numbers, and so forth and so forth. If I can show that apart from it having a global presence, it also exists in our continent, it can also be found in pockets of the nation that we're in, and most importantly, if you've chosen to study your area in a particular city, or particular town, you can drill it down to that town to show that this problem exists at every population level of the world as we know it. If you can demonstrate that, then you are telling everybody that this study that I'm doing is not just for my friends who live down the corridor or whatever. This problem that I'm answering will provide answers that are meaningful to someone nationally, to someone in my continent, to someone on the whole of this globe that we exist on. So that's the first way that you can demonstrate this. The second way that you demonstrate the multidimensionality of a problem is through you demonstrating what we call topicality. And this is to do with you showing that the problem is acute and it exists here and now. So if you are able to extract literature that talks about your challenge as being a challenge that's facing the world in 2023, your ability to show that, look, this topic I've chosen and focused on, this question I want, is currently being asked by many people in my field, and all of them are doing it as we speak in 2023. Then you are showing me that, look, that topic you've chosen has the currency and the topicality to make it a here and now problem that must be attended to. The other way that you demonstrate that a problem is expansive and deserves attention is to demonstrate what we call relevance. Now, relevance is a slightly different operator from topicality. When I say something is relevant in the world of problematization, I'm basically saying that this thing has been a problem for many years before this, and it continues to be a problem that affects us. So if I can show that the problem of businesses failing is something that was studied by people in the 1980s, and they did it in the 1990s, they are continuing to do it, and they struggle even now to understand it, then I'm showing that that field of study, that question is a relevant question because it has a long-term presence and it's something that needs to be fixed because it has caused us problems in the long term. So that is the other operator. Then, of course, there's something that people talk about as being the topic significance, or sometimes they talk about it as being the nature of a topic. So there's some topics that don't affect the entire world, so they don't tick yes on the global, continental, and national marker. They are not topical because they are not being spoken about on all the front newspapers here and now. They are not relevant because they haven't lasted forever, but they are significant by the virtue of the subjective normative experience that people who go through it have. So and usually we measure this through trauma. So here's a typical example. This happens very rarely, where maybe a father in a household might decide that he's a failure and decide he wants to kill himself and kill all his family at once. These particular events, in terms of the numeric occurrence of them, they're very, very unlikely. They happen very, very rarely. Numerically, they're probably less than 0.5% of our adult population ever worry about the head of the household turning on them and killing everybody. But the nature of that event is that even if it happens once in 10 years, people are so traumatized as humanity about it. The subjective, the normative, the experiential insight into it is so disturbing that it deserves to be studied, even though it does not have all the other dimensionality expectations that you have. We are studying it more because of the high impact, the high trauma quotient associated with it. So essentially what we're saying is that if you want a topic to stand out and people to believe that it's worthy, you must demonstrate to the reader either that it's got global, continental, national existence, either that it's topical, either that it's relevant, either that the nature of the topic or the area is so traumatizing and so problematic for humanity that it needs to be understood and researched. If your research problem that you've chosen has got any of these markers, then you've got an excellent opportunity to really have a worthy problem. If your research focus can show more than one of these, so it exists all over the world, it's topical, and then it's also been driving the world crazy for years. So it marks green on 3 accounts. Then you've got an even much more compelling problem for you to deal with. And this is why when people give an overview of the problem that relates to their study, when they give the problem statement, they may start by giving an overview of the statistics that relate to the problem. Then they may give a quick overview of the ongoing debates, the topicality. Then they may actually show a presentation of the longitudinal presence of this problem. That, look, we've been debating this since 1922 and we continue now and so forth. When they do that, the way that people write a problem statement is systematic. It's not guesswork. It is systematic, and the system I'm presenting to you is this system of how you expose the multidimensionality of the problem. Now, some of you will think, hang on, some problem statements or introduction to topics always start with statistics, and others don't start with statistics. Some people will start with just giving an overview of the fact that the problem has existed for 40 years. How do I decide how my study will start? And how you decide is you ask yourself, okay, my study has all these dimensions here, but which of the dimensions did I find most compelling? What is it about my focus that makes it so outstanding, so exceptional? Is it mainly because it affects everybody? Is it mainly because it's topical? Is it mainly because of this? And if it's mainly because it affects everybody, then one would think you would begin your write-up about it using the statistics showing the global, the continental, and national existence. So, and so forth. So I hope now you get a sense that there's a system for how you make your problem big enough and you break it, you deconstruct it so everyone can see the internals of the problem. There's a system on how you prioritize, how you speak us through the problem. There's a system to how you show that that problem is worthy of the focus. If you looked at something you studied and you could not show any of the dimensions to be relevant to that thing, then you essentially don't have a research problem and you should dump it too. So those are the operators for that. Now, this is the easy part. This last part is easy. Once you've got the initial bits about how you make your problem look big, how you indicate what it is about what question exists in relation to that question, to that focus that you want to have answered, then you are in a good space to now develop the aim of the study, the objectives, and the questions. And before we go there, where people get stuck is just being able to separate what an aim is, what objectives are, and so forth. So an aim, folks, is what you hope to do, your overall intention in the project. It signals what and or where you aspire to be in the end. What is it that you aim to understand by the time you get to the study, to the end of the study? So in my example, my aim would be to identify, my aim would be to develop insights into the range of contributing factors, into the range of influences that contribute to the success or failure of single-owned companies versus multi-owned companies, something of that nature. That is the aim. Remember, your aim is always about the journey that you are traveling to gain knowledge. So your aim is not that you aim to develop a model. No, your aim is that you aim to understand something in order that you can develop an explanatory framework. That framework could be a model, it could be recommendations. But the part to do with the framework, the part to do with the model, to do with the recommendations is not the aim. It is what follows the aim. Once you've done the aim, then it prepares you to be able to do those other things. Then the objectives. No, before I get to the objectives, the aim therefore represents that point that you see as your ultimate upper understanding that you seek to have. So if we were to specify this in terms of a journey on the road, if you didn't know the road, the directions to a city called X, let's say you didn't know the directions to Johannesburg, to Addis Ababa, whatever the city is from where you are, your aim is to be able to get to that destination. But your objectives are the little steps that you will take to get to the final destination. So when we talk about objectives, what we are literally saying is that, look, if you're going to study something, or you have got an aim to understand something, to get to that understanding, there are smaller pieces of knowledge you need to gain to be able to achieve your aim. Those smaller pieces are called objectives. And it makes sense that the higher your level of study, so if you talk about a doctorate compared to a master's, compared to a dissertation of limited scope and so forth, they all have different numbers of objectives. You will know that the PhD or the doctorate will have many more objectives because the aim is that much further. The thing you want to understand is likely to be that much more complex. So the steps to understanding it are more than those that would exist for someone doing a lower level of study. And people always ask me, so Prof, we need to have numbers to marry up with this. How many aims can a study have? The answer to that is, for your purposes, for you as a student on a program of study, you only can have one aim. Your study can only have one aim. Other forms of research, where people are doing it for market purposes, for other fun reasons, they can have more than one aim. But for your purposes, all your studies that you would do as a student will always only have one aim. And the number of objectives, they can have a number of objectives because the objectives are the steps that you will take to achieve the aim. So I will give some baseline numbers. These are not prescriptive, by the way, folks. They are not, you are not going to find a textbook that says these are the numbers. But having done this work for a good 17 years or so, I know over the thousands and thousands of dissertations and theses that I've looked at, I know very vaguely that someone who's doing a dissertation of limited scope probably will have between 2 and 3 objectives. Someone who's doing a full master's dissertation will have between 3 and 5 objectives. And someone who's doing a doctorate will have generally about 5 to 8 objectives. Those numbers, once again, I said, are just ballpark numbers to give you a sense of whether you are on the right track or not. They are not prescriptions. There are people who have different numbers from what I've given, and their work is perfectly okay. But those numbers that I've shared with you are the basic averages that you get to see out in the practice of people developing work. Now, so we know something about the objectives, we know something about the aim. There's a person called Benjamin Bloom. This person is literally the godfather to how we understand how we deal with things that we get to know, how we process knowledge. The system, his system and the taxonomy is a system of thinking. Bloom's taxonomy is a system of thinking that helps us to better understand how people learn and understand a topic, or learn and understand anything, really. And what Benjamin Bloom argued, and this is old work, it's back in the 70s or 50s, it's very old work. I think it's 1957 actually, it's very old work, but its messages and its system of presenting things is exactly what we all do. When you go to a university and you do your first year of study, you realize that the questions seem to be a particular way. Second year, they progress and so forth and so forth. That progression is all from this taxonomy. And what Bloom basically argued was that when people, 1950s, so it was 1957 actually, that Benjamin came up with this. And he basically was of the view that when you are thinking or getting to learn about stuff, we go through certain cognitive layers of understanding of that phenomena, and those layers of cognitive understanding give us a system for us to develop learning objectives. So if you're developing objectives for a study, there is an order in which those objectives will appear, and that order is guided by the system that Bloom's orientated it to. And that system is this system. Basically, when you read this, please read it from the bottom to the up to the top. Please read it from the bottom to the top, the bottom being the most easiest form of knowledge, and then the top being the most difficult type of knowledge. And Bloom's work, although it was quite seminal, it's been revised by people. And the current format that we use are the new terms that you've got on the right of the screen. And what those new terms do is they basically dictate or share with you how people learn and develop knowledge about any phenomena that requires you getting to know it. So the first step that Bloom argued was that when you meet a topic or you meet something, your very, very first set of types of things that you do is you gain knowledge around it, you gain comprehension of what's going on, you understand the phenomena better. So by that argument, all your first objectives that you do when you are creating objectives for a study, your first objective should be about finalizing, should be about completing your understanding of the phenomena that you are studying. So take, for example, in my case, the example that I've given, where I'm studying people's why certain businesses fail compared to others. My first part that I might want to understand is to actually get a sense of the statistical difference between the success of single person companies versus multiple person companies. Getting that knowledge allows me to gain a good understanding of what's going on, to get some knowledge about what the real status according to the literature is. And sometimes I may also want to understand in what ways companies that fail. Do they fail because they run out of money? Do they fail because their products don't make it? Do they fail because they perform, but they perform later than was promised? So my first objective is really about just getting a foundational understanding of the field as a whole. Then once I've got that understanding, my next set of objectives is about the types of analytical things that I will try to understand. Do I want to understand this phenomena? Maybe I want to understand what factors contribute to this from the perspectives of the banks that give money to individuals. I want to understand it from the perspectives of the individuals who fail. So I'm analyzing, getting a sense of what's going on from different perspectives. Then, of course, the other possibility is that I then want to maybe develop some objective that looks at me evaluating what people's perceptions of what's going on is. Can I get a sense from my source of data, how they feel about the different contributing factors to success or failure? What is my evaluation of what's going on? What are the conclusive opinions that exist in relation to what it is that causes people to do well versus others who don't do well? And then finally, you might end by saying, look, now that I understand the factors that contribute to this, my final objective is that I want to create a model that helps businesses to survive this traumatic journey. So you realize that your objectives, one, you had an objective to do with comprehension and understanding, you had an objective to do with analysis, you had an objective to do with synthesis, stroke evaluation, you had an objective to do with creating. That objective being you saying, look, I now understand this and I want to propose recommendations, strategies, or a new model for this. So you realize that even the ordering of your objectives has been subjected to this phenomena. What Bloom says is that this is a general order and direction in which people develop their understanding of things. You don't necessarily have to go through all the steps. You don't have to do remember, understand, analyze, apply, evaluate, creating. You may find that in your study, one objective is about remembering, the other objective is about analysis, the next one's about creating. The things that you miss or include don't really define whether you are right or wrong, but what does matter is that when it comes to presenting your objectives, the order in which they are presented should make sense to this. So you'll find that most people, their first objective will be to determine something, to identify something, to describe something. That's the first objective, because you want to show your knowledge, your comprehension of the topic. Then your next set of objectives is where you want to analyze things, you want to gain in-depth understanding. Then your next set of objectives might be to do with evaluating the reasons for X, the reasons for Y, and then the final one will be to do with you creating something to answer and respond to this issue. So that's basically how you work and the process by which you go through and walk through developing your aim, your objectives, and so forth. What we do, folks, is I develop the lecture and I give you this theoretical position. You go and you test it out and so forth. Then what we do is we invite you as participants to submit your work. We have a lot of reviewers who will look at the work you've developed and then they comment on it and see how well you followed the principles that I shared with you. So this is the next step that you will have in relation to this. I have some further reading here, which you will have access to. These are slightly older texts, but the journey and the theory around developing objectives, it hasn't changed. It's the same. The objectives themselves change because we study different topics, but the approach to them is the same. So here's some further reading for you. Now, finally, just got a couple of things. So currently, when people develop and work on their problems, they have a very foundational set of problems that they're interested in. So people will say to you, look, they are interested in the problem to say, for example, this problem of businesses failing. I am interested in that because I may come from a college that looks at business. But what is good for you to know is also to understand that the university has got specific research fields that they are interested in you optimizing or making use of. The university is not saying take those and make them your central topic. No, the university is saying, look, while you are studying your topic, please consider including a dimension that looks at these niche areas. And the university calls those things catalytic niche areas. We have 10 of them, and I will share with you the subject fields that they are. So they're all intended to be things that you can consider adding as a dimension to your field. You don't have to add any more than one of the dimensions, but if you add one of those dimensions, you change quite a lot about your study. Firstly, the niche areas that we've chosen are chosen for very specific reasons. Right? We choose them for very specific reasons. And those reasons are this. I'm just taking you to the reasons now. The first is that the niche areas we've chosen and selected as the areas we want to promote at UNISA, we choose them because we've identified that they have lots of grants that are available and the grants are unused. So if you're a student and you want your study to be funded, you could add a small dimension to what you're studying so that it increases your chance to get funding for your study. So that's the first reason we have these niche areas. Secondly, some of the niche areas we've identified because they speak to a legacy of underrepresentation of very specific groups within certain disciplines. So for example, one of our niche areas is aeronautic studies. If you go and you look, you'll find that it's an area and a discipline that's primarily taken up by white males. And we think that as a university, we need to actively stimulate people who are not of that background to pursue that area so that we can see a different type of representation in relation to that field, so that in years to come, we have got aeronautical engineers who are Black, African women, and all sorts of things. We also have chosen certain things to be niche areas because they give us structured attention to societal priority areas. So for example, if we know that, look, the health of African nations is very, very compromised, and we want anyone who's studying anything to always consider the health dimension as well. So if, say, you are someone who's doing a study on education and you are looking at success and failure rates of students, you could actually look at success and failure rates of students and their implications on the health status of that individual. By adding that dimension of health, you have now allowed us to give attention to a priority area that society needs to figure out urgently, and so forth. And of course, you have now increased your own chances of obtaining a grant to support your studies. Then finally, the other reason we specify catalytic niche areas is that the best universities in the world become the best because they have very focused research agenda. They will say, look, we are known for this. So when you talk about Harvard will be known for its medical school. They are known for its business school. They teach every other thing, but they are known that their research agenda is around that space. You go to the different universities, they have very different types of things that they're associated with. And we need also as a university to have things that we are known to be leading thinkers on and in relation to. So those are the reasons we have catalytic niche areas. And to finalize, we have these 10 areas that we've identified. People will say, please explain these to me. But literally what you can do, and as we proceed through the work, we will explain them to you. But you could literally just go through any Google search and put in marine studies. What is that about? Aviation and aeronautical studies. What is that about? Automotive science. What is that about? Energy. What is that about? Space study and square kilometer array. What is that about? The other areas that we focus on are the fourth industrial revolution and digitalization, natural sciences or biotechnological studies, health studies and medicine. We also look at feminist, womanist, Bosadi theorizations, and finally, one of the niche areas we have is student support and co-curricular activities. So what we're saying to you is that no matter what department you belong to and where your study is, keep that focus, but try to look at one of these potential niche areas and add them on as an additional dimension to your study. So if, say, for example, you are looking at the whole issue to do with the business success and failures of success, but you actually had a sense that it was something that was determined also by gender, you could then put in a feminist dimension to your study. And once you do that, then it becomes a study that is optimized, one of our niche areas. You then start to qualify for more grant opportunities than otherwise. And of course, you contribute to areas that have historically been not contributed to in the way that we think is appropriate. So that's the general sense with these things. I've shared them with you so you can see them. You can look at your current topic and think, how could I relate it to one of these things? Or add this as a dimension. So what you are really doing is that you've got your problem, but add one more dimension to it so that you look at one of these things. Don't try to aim for 4 niche areas in one. It gets rather clumsy. What you want is to look at one add-on niche area that you can work with. And on that note, I'm happy to kind of pull this session to an end. I've spoken in the sense about the fact that we have chosen the areas because they speak to issues that affect us all. We also want to be at the front end of this intellectual future of the world. We also want a coherent sense of what students do, that we can almost be assured that everything that UNISA does will be the specific discipline with some attention paid to one of the 10 niche areas. So that is where this goes. And on that note, I am happy to actually now consider questions from you, both in relation to the topic development element, but also in relation to the issues around the niche areas. I am just going to stop that sharing and revert to questions. Right. Okay, let me open up. Right, colleagues, or to the different student groups, I noticed that we have we had some questions, but many of the questions that have been asked related to items to do with administrative content, and they have been answered, or the people questioned have been given direct responses. So, but in as far as actual questions that relate to this, I am looking here and I don't see any live questions that have been posed. Often, this very first session, students find is quite overwhelming in terms of the new information that you're getting, and people are just interested to know or to find the space to go away and apply this systematically to their topic development processes, to their processes for developing their objectives and their aim. Of course, when I mentioned the word topic, people were hoping I would share with you how you go around writing out your topic so that it meets the requirements for your department. That, colleagues, or to the different M&D students, that is something that can be done, but over the progression of time, we found it to actually be more of a problem than a help, because different departments have different aspirations, different supervisors have different preferences, and above all, your topic that you generate is actually a work in progress. So we call it a working topic. And what working title? So what you develop here will change and change and change and change. But there are some basic rules I could share with you. The first is that there are two different types of methodologies for writing topics. The first methodology is people go with what they call a scientific generation. They call it a scientific generation of the topic, and to do that, they use particular frameworks that help you to understand how you work from an idea into a focused topic area. And how it works, the two different separations work something like this. The first type is that they are people, they are disciplines, subject fields, departments, and areas of practice that are just interested in a topic that's catching, a topic that makes sense to a reader. So you will find that somebody will have a topic that just says understanding the factors related to business failures. That's it. Nothing more, nothing detailed, except that the topic actually gives you a sense of what's going on. Then there are other formats where people will talk about a topic having to have certain components in it for it to meet the requirements of a topic. And so that's more the scientific topic development process. And people will say that a topic should firstly have a very clear target group. So it should be in your topic, it should be clear who it is you're studying. It should also be clear what the objective of the study is. And people will say it should also be very clear what the outcomes of that you're expecting to see are. So then you would find that the topics will go with something like a comparative analysis of the responses that young males have to this type of treatment. So you realize then that that topic has specified all the elements to do with who the target population was, what it is that you're trying to understand about them, and so forth. But those are the two basic worlds of topic development. But as I say, your best measure is to work with your supervisor and get a sense of what their mood is in relation to your study, knowing full well that as you develop, probably 95% of students revise their topic just before they submit. They don't revise the focus area, but they revise how they've titled their focus. So, and that is the reason why I've not overly emphasized that issue, because it's one that self reveals as time progresses. Now, I'm looking through here. We've got a question about slides and the recording, and one of our moderators has provided a link for this. So there's a link that's provided. Then there's someone saying, is there funding for someone studying outside the research niche areas? Look, the story about funding is a bit tricky. The story about funding is a bit tricky in that all university students are entitled to a bursary. Once you complete your proposal and your proposal is accepted by the department where you are studying, you are entitled to a bursary. But that gives very minimal focus, minimal monetary resource for you, so you can barely do the study. But those who want to do much more go out into the open world and they apply for grants. So The bursaries, all of you are entitled or have an opportunity to apply. You're eligible. You may not get it, but you're eligible. Once your proposal has been accepted, you've been granted ethical clearance and so forth. But in terms of grant opportunities, your grants are given by industry at large, they are given by private entities, and they will prioritize fields of study that they think matter. The reason we chose those 10 niche areas is we've done an extensive study of where the biggest amounts of grants seem to be grouped up, and in those 10 areas, they seem to have quite substantial grant opportunities. So by definition, you have a much higher chance of getting a grant if you apply in that space. It doesn't mean you don't get a grant if you don't apply. It just means that you have a less viable topic area in terms of where the grants appear to be. Do your aims and objectives ever overlap in some instances? This plain answer is never, ever. Your aim is a final destination. Your objectives are the steps you move to the aim. So sometimes the objectives will have things that look like they're information you need to know to get to the aim. So it appears as if it's an overlap, but really it's a progression. It's a little bit like saying, if you aim to obtain 10 positive answers, the steps that you will proceed are maybe getting 2 positive answers, 4 positive answers, 6 positive answers before you get to the 10. And someone says, is 2, 4, and 6 quite similar to, does it have an overlap to 10? In a way it does, because it is a subset of 10, but the two things aren't the same. One is the final destination, one is a component. So that is the difference. I've submitted a list of topics for my doctoral supervisor so he can guide me in selecting one. How may I get approval of the topic to proceed with writing the proposal? So look, this notion of submitting topics to a doctoral supervisor is actually quite incorrect. I think once I show you the system that you have to, you identify a viable problem, you magnify the problem, you defend it, you show it, then you can now develop an aim around that problem. So this idea that you can give a whole menu of topics is really not the way that research expects you to practice. I do know departments like that, but you should know that if you want it to work, you can only submit topics that you have subjected to the whole journey of understanding the problem, magnifying it, and just understanding what it is that's not understood by others in the field, adding a niche area interest so that it really makes the complete package. So that's the story. We have requested once again a request for us to share the slides. Here is a link to all the recordings, and there's a link to the slides. Is it possible for a study to reach a dead end or a topic not researchable? Folks, I think I spoke a number of times about this. I compel the person who's asking this to please go back to the earlier part of my session, because I said to you, if you can't show that a study it relates to a problem that can be quantified, a problem that is worthy of focus, a problem that is topical, a problem that is statistical significance, a problem for whom we do not have answers, a problem that the literature has alluded to, then it is not researchable. Then, of course, the issue about researchability also has something to do with whether you bite off too big an issue. So that's where you have to remember you're a single person. You can't ask a research question that needs 400 people over the next 20 years. And that bit is to do with you just having a greater sense of the practical feasibility of what it is that you're trying to study. Can a supervisor provide a topic of interest to a supervisee? Folks, The true honest answer is they should not. Does it happen? Yes, I'm fairly sure it does, but it shouldn't be. You apply into a university with your problem. You don't come to the university and we give you a problem. So what your supervisor can do is to give you different representations of that problem that you've got. And honestly speaking, the students that are given topics also present with the highest rates of dropout because they don't have traction with the topic. They are just doing it because it is there. Right, folks, I am looking here and I see that we have covered everything. We are doing a lot of things to communicate with you via your UNISA platform. Please check your UNISA email. That's our primary space of communication. There is a session once again tomorrow. So please join. The session will be, I will be in attendance in one shape or form, but the leading facilitator will be Professor Sechalo. So with that said, I want to thank you all for attending, and I acknowledge the positive comments that have been given. I also just want to point to the fact that there will be a recording of this, so you can watch it over and over and over again. And the fact that please watch out for invitations for you to submit your work that's in progress so we can give you hands-on feedback. Thank you very, very much. Have a great evening, and I want to thank you once again.